More now from that bombshell interview with the former Trump chief of staff, John Kelly, about his time in Trump's White House. Kelly was asked about the former president's behavior when it came to the Constitution and the all-important rule of law. Watch this.
Did the former president appreciate the Constitution? Did he appreciate any of these things?
No.
He expected the people that worked for him to break the law?
Well, when he would give, and I think I've told you this many times, when he would tell me that he wanted to do something, 100% of the time I checked with the White House counsel, because oftentimes he wouldn't have the authority to do what he wanted to do.
When he was confronted with the fact that he couldn't do something legally, did he want to do it anyway?
He would try to make the case that he did have the authority.
Oh boy, let's discuss. Maria Teresa Kumar is here, MSNBC contributor, president and CEO of Voto Latino. And Reed Galen is here in New York with me, longtime GOP strategist, now president of JoinTheUnion.us and host of the Homefront podcast. Maria Teresa, what is your reaction to that? I think you're muted. What do you think,
after all these years, Stephanie.
Here you go, Maria. You know what? Trump heard you were going to say something negative, and somehow he got you muted, girl.
Well, I was going to share with you. I mean, I can tell you that as chief of staff, Kelly and I were in opposite directions because he was also charged with family separation. But what I can tell you is, on occasion that I went to the White House to meet with Jared Kushner and to meet with Secretary Nielsen, as I was walking down the halls in the White House, most presidents, whether we're talking about Bush, whether we're talking about Obama, they have pictures of them going around the world, meeting children from around the world. It's a very joyful experience. When I walked down the halls of the White House under Trump, it was pictures of the North Korean leader and Trump. And that speaks to who his true north is. What Kelly is saying, and I hope that American people are listening, he is absolutely a fascist through and through. One of the things that I found striking was that Kelly was talking about how he, what was concerning with him, that Trump has told the American people that he's going to use the military against us, against his enemies who are American citizens. And I just need to remind everybody that he deployed the National Guard in Washington, D.C. against peaceful protesters when they were protesting George Floyd. These were peaceful protesters. If you remember, many of our colleagues in the press got caught in the dragnet. They had to wear bulletproof vests and helmets because he was deploying tear gas. This is not what will Trump be, but it's more, if anything, refocusing us on what he already did and how he plans to double down on American values against our Constitution and so much more.
What do you think?
I think that, one, it's important that someone like General Kelly, a four-star retired general, comes out and says something. I know that there's a lot of hesitation amongst military leaders because of the rapport that they build up with the public, that they feel like they are servants of the country. They should stay above politics. But I think, obviously, General Kelly finally decided he couldn't do that. I think General Milley has done the same. Look, I think that from the military's perspective, if he has to do these things, in some of the simulations I participated in, a lot of the military leadership understands the roadblocks they could throw up in front of a leader like Trump. But I think it's important also to put this in the context now of last summer's Supreme Court decision, which is anything Trump does in office, theoretically, he could be okay with. It could be an official act. And so I think a lot of the things that Kelly's talking about in this that were roadblocks then would not necessarily be roadblocks now.
Maria Teresa, the New York Times dropped another investigation tonight focused on Donald Trump's ties to Project 2025. He's tried very hard to distance himself, but many of his former officials were involved in writing this thing. Officials that he still is close with, not the John Kellys. What does that tell you?
J.D. Vance was one of the ones that wrote the preface to Project 2025. I mean, his running mate literally is part of the project. We've had him say it out loud. Donald Trump actually say out loud that he's applauding Project 2025. But when you look at Project 2025, and one of the reasons why it's so dangerous is that some of the stuff that was on the blueprint, he he already implemented in his first term in office. And when we say, well, what is he going to do with Project 2025? He's going to centralize power to the White House. And this is what he has now that he didn't have before. He understands how government works. He understands the vulnerability of our institutions. And he has placed judges on the state and federal level that are now going to do his bidding, because they are going to basically focus on what he can do and the laws that they are going to be able to bend to his will. We have a whole different slate of judges that just did not exist before. So everything that he is saying around Project 2020-50, he tries to distance himself, but we know intimately that the people that are who wrote it are part of the cabinet that he's promised if they actually continue proceeding forward. And again, the American people, I think one of our challenges is that we live in such siloed information ways to receive information that we're not getting the same thing. I can tell you that I was in Nevada just over the weekend, knocking on doors, talking to voters, and some of the stuff that voters were saying very innocently sounded like it made sense until you actually had to walk them back because they weren't getting real information.
Reed, why is this race so close?
I think there's a lot of things. I think for Republicans, Donald Trump is a regular Republican now. I think, maybe.
You're a Republican.
I'm not. I'm never going to be. I left the party and will never go back. My job now is to make sure.
But a regular Republican
right.
is your kind of Republican.
It was at a time. Doesn't exist anymore, with that exception of that little narrow
so
band of.
So people like you have moved, or they've left the party?
Yes. I think both. I think that you saw, remember that Donald Trump losing 10 to 15% to Nikki Haley in primaries is bad news for him. If half those people stay home or vote for Harris, he's in trouble. If a third of those people do that, he's in trouble. So I think that the party has moved with him. I think the other part, too, is that we should think about this. We are now 50 years downstream of Rush Limbaugh, 30 years downstream of Fox News, 10 years downstream of Donald Trump. Republicans have been inculcated into this information environment. When Maria goes out there and sees this stuff, it's not because, oh my gosh, this stuff just popped up out of nowhere. This has been a plan like Project 2025 that's been in the works for decades. They have spent billions. And even when Donald Trump loses, it's not like they're going to fold up their tents and go home. They will double down on this stuff.